I get the experience all over again of watching people fall in love with the country and fall in love with the people, and not that I need that to happen. I'm pretty much in love with where I go. And I'd go back tomorrow if I could. Those of you who know me and have seen me talk before know that I like to type my speeches out because I don't want to forget any of the details. I limited this to 3 experiences because I have hundreds of them and I didn't want to keep you here all night. Last month I made my 5th trip to our sister parish of Saint Laurent. Each trip has been more fulfilling than the last. I find myself drawing closer to Christ, and I feel His Spirit more intensely in my heart and soul. I wonder how each trip can be better than the last, but then I remember nothing is impossible with God. I am astounded at His generosity, that He has chosen me to serve in this ministry. I know deep in my heart that the grace I receive, the peace that fills my heart, and the joy I experience while in Haiti is far, far greater than what I'm ever able to give to the people there. I would like to share 3 moments from this year's trip, 3 encounters with Christ. I hope my words can capture the great love and compassion of the Haitian people. I pray that you can more deeply understand their needs, and I hope that I am able to share the peace and joy that fills my soul when I am with our sisters and brothers. There is something very, very special about the Haitian people. You've heard it from everyone who spoke here tonight. They have a deep joy in their souls, a joy that can only come from their profound faith in God. Each time I return to Saint Laurent, I feel as though I'm going home to my family in Haiti. The friendships I've established are deep and strong. There is a patriarch in the village who is 86 years old. His name is Monsieur Dormeville. His small house is just a short distance from the church of Saint Laurent. As we arrived in Bassin and drove along the dusty dirt road on the way to the church, I saw him sitting on his front porch. He saw Peroni's brand new truck coming up the road. He slowly stood and raised his hand in greeting. Peroni quickly pulled over to the side of the road so I could run down the short hill to say hello. As I ran down the hill, Monsieur Dormeville slowly and deliberately leaned on his cane and stepped down off of his front porch to greet me. Although his memory is fading, he remembered me. His cataract-covered eyes lit up and he smiled broadly. He held my hand and he kissed my cheek. Because we speak different languages, we can't communicate much with words, but I know that his heart was every bit as full as mine. I knew that I was home and that Christ had blessed me with yet another visit with my dear friend. In the past, I've distributed photographs of the children of Saint Laurent to our parishioners and have asked for their prayers. Many people have asked for the children's names. So this trip, I set a goal of taking pictures of all of the children at summer camp holding a whiteboard with their name written on it, all 274 children. I had the easy job of taking the photos, while Emily painstakingly wrote their beautiful yet unusual names on the board, erasing each one with her t-shirt and writing the next name. We spent almost all day Thursday and Friday doing this. As we finished our work late Friday afternoon, my good friend, a 17-year-old named Jackie, asked to look at the pictures on my camera. There's Jackie. Hi, Jackie. This is his story. After a few minutes of looking at the camera, he got very quiet, and he looked at me. I will never forget the anguish in his eyes, the disbelief as he handed me the camera, which displayed the words, "No images on card." My 549 pictures and videos were gone. I simply walked away for a couple of minutes to pray for the words I would need to comfort my young friend, and so that he would not be able to see my eyes filled with tears. I knew it would be very difficult to explain to him that the tears were not for the lost photos, but for him, for his sorrow. When I went back to him, he would not raise his eyes to look at me. With the help of a dear friend, Rico, who is 15 years old and speaks English, I was able to express my love and forgiveness to Jackie. But it was not until 2 days later, late Sunday afternoon, that Jackie finally lifted his eyes to mine. The sparkle was not back in his eyes. Truly, his only concern was for me. This boy who plays soccer in mismatched shoes that are falling apart, who goes to bed hungry every night, who lives in a tiny, tiny house with his mother and his 2 adult sisters and their children and their husbands, was torn apart because he had lost some photos of mine. His sorrow was so genuine. It gave me a glimpse of the sorrow Christ must have when we walk away from him, when we are lost. I know how desperately Jackie wanted those photos back. Imagine how desperately Christ wants us back when we stray. That evening we headed up the mountain for a walk, a quiet walk, a time to reflect with no camera, no photos. I needed some time to listen to God and to feel his intimate love. As I rounded a bend on the dirt road, there was my dear little 8-year-old friend, Avda. We'd been in Bassin for 7 days, and I had not yet seen her. It was at this time of need that Christ graced me with her presence. My spirits were lifted by the look on her face when she saw me. Her 3-year-old cousin, Ricardite, came down the path crying, her nose running, her eyes oozing with infection. I placed my hands on her head to pray for her, and she was burning up with fever. I promised her aunt that I would return with some medicine. As we headed back to the rectory, all I could think to offer was my Tylenol tablets cut in quarters. But Christ, ever the healer, answered my prayers in a far better way. Last summer, we brought Peroni over 50 pounds of over-the-counter medications donated by Our Lady of the Chesapeake in Pasadena. I looked in the closet where some of the items remain. Right in the middle, on the shelf right in front of my eyes, was a full unopened bottle of children's Tylenol. By the time we returned to the top of the mountain, little Ricardite was even hotter. I'm certain her temperature was at least 105 or 106 degrees. My friend Rico accompanied me so that he could translate the medication dosage and to advise her aunt to apply damp compresses to Ricardite's head and neck and to administer the Tylenol throughout the night. You know, I thought that was a great idea to put some cool compresses on her. And it wasn't until I came home and was rethinking that whole story that I realized they probably didn't even have any water. They lived 3/4 of the way up the mountain. It was late in the day, probably 6 o'clock in the evening, so whatever water they'd gathered that morning, I'm sure was gone after cooking and bathing the 15 people that lived up in that compound. There were several different families, and I thought, gosh, even something as simple as being able to put a cool rag on your child's head is a struggle in Haiti. We returned early the next morning and several more times before we left. Each time, little Ricardite was a little bit better, although she still had a slight fever. She's being raised by her aunt because her parents are both deceased. Her aunt said she's often very, very sick. Please pray for her and her family as they struggle to feed yet another child. And please pray that one day we will be able to bring medical personnel to the village of Bassin. The stories are endless. Some are sad, some are joyful. Each of them has a lesson for us to learn, and all of them are full of God's love and his divine providence. Although desperately poor in material things, the people in the villages have a deep and profound faith. I think perhaps when your day-to-day existence is so challenging, it becomes ever more clear that you must rely on God in all things. I repeat what I always say upon my return. We have much to learn from our sisters and brothers in Christ, and I'm counting the days until I return.